We all have a story to tell. Let's tell yours. Welcome to the Intellectual People Podcast with your host, Jason. Come together and listen to journey stories and more from interesting people. Welcome your host, Jason.
Welcome to the Intellectual People Podcast. I often post on forums, and I'd like to personally thank those forum owners for allowing me to post on those forums. In no particular order, they are audiosciencereview.com, audiocircle.com, audioshark.org, audiofilestyle.com, AV Nirvana, which is also the home of Rumi Q Wizard and AudioLens, DIYaudio.com, gears.com, and Parts Express Forum. Thank you so much and enjoy. Today, I'm sitting with Amir from audiosciencereview.com. How are you doing today?
Fantastic. How's it going with you, Jason?
Very well, thank you. Amir, tell us what audiosciencereview.com is.
Well, I'll tell you what it started as and what it's morphed into. There are slightly different things. The original thing was exactly what the name says, Audio Science Review. I realized a lot of the good information about audio research and engineering is locked up behind paywalls. Audio Engineering Society, Audio Society of America, IEEE, and others, they all have, you got to pay membership to be able to get these papers. And the second problem they have is that the papers are there, they're written for their peers. So they're not written for average person to understand. Some of them are extremely, technical or a lot of math in them and so forth. So I thought there was a need to take those papers and write a digest of it, in that I would simplify the language, explain to a layperson what it means, and only pick the papers that had value. For example, are long-term listening tests, more reliable than short-term? That's a common thing comes up. People fight over why do we do blind tests and, psychoacoustics and so forth. So there are a lot of good papers there, and I used to cite them when I was members of other forums, but I thought, why not just create this site? I thought nobody would show up, and it'd be just me and 5 other people. Well, a few more people showed up, the usual crowd fighting, against science and for science, and that went on, and it was okay. We grew to a few hundred members. And then one day somebody said, what do you think of these cheap DACs, Amir? I said, I don't know. I've got this audio analyzer. It's been sitting here from a project I had 20 years ago. I could measure them. I said, yeah, there are these $99 DACs. Sold on Amazon. So, okay, I went and bought a few of these things. And I expected them to be the same. Typical objectivist point of view is that they're all good enough and this stuff's not hard to make. And to my surprise, when I started testing them, even rudimentarily with just simple signals, I could see there was large differences between them. And one of them popped out from this company I'd never heard of called Topping. Had a DAC called a D30, and it was $99 and well made. It did very well. I was surprised. And I opened the manual, has audio precision. My analyzer graphs actually inside this no-name Chinese company manual. I said, no wonder they're doing a good job. The other ones didn't come with that, and they did poorly. So I thought, wow, maybe we need to analyze these things. It doesn't look like, we could take it for granted that these things are designed well. So I went to spend a few $1,000s next on a whole bunch of DACs, up to expensive ones and everything in between, and kept measuring these and posting these, refining the tests. And then I thought, wow, this is not going to scale. Me sitting here and keep buying stuff out of my nickel on this thing. And lo and behold, somebody reached out to me and said, hey, I've got this DAC. Do you want to measure it? Right. I said, oh, you'll send it to me? Oh my God, okay, send it to me. That's great, he's trusting me. That little trickle started, and it got more and more and more. Next thing I know, I'm testing DACs every third day on this thing. And as you probably know, DACs, these are what I call desktop DACs. They're cheaper DACs. People use them with headphones and what have you. So they're a large part of the market. So a lot of attention was put on them, and the forum grew. And I was like, hey, maybe this is part of my calling. Sure. Is to be doing this, because testing these things requires skill, requires expensive equipment, which I happen to have. And then we also still discuss audio engineering and science and what have you. But this thing has become our anchor, what I call sort of like a mall. They have the major department stores. Reviews have become the corner stores,
Right.
and then their discussion in between. So what it is today is a discussion of science engineering, but also tons of reviews. I do one review a day of different classes of products.
Okay, let's talk about how you actually got there. So were you interested in music as a little boy?
No,
No.
not a musician.
You were a musician?
I was not. I'm still
were
not to this day. I had a wish to become a musician, not a musician. I wanted to play, but I got a guitar and I just put my fingers on the strings. I was like, whoa, this is a lot harder than it seems. I'm not into that. I grew up with my oldest brother being into electronics. So electronics was our hobby. Naturally, three boys, all three brothers. We all fell in love with electronics. My oldest brother knew the most, and it would trickle down to two of us. And soon enough, one of the projects we built was an audio amplifier. And so we built this little stereo, 10 watt, 20 watt channel amplifier. And then all of a sudden, this audiophile bug hit us at the time. My middle brother and myself were the two. My oldest brother wasn't into that. And we started to buy hi-fi equipment, bought a stereo, bought an amplifier, bought a reel-to-reel, bought speakers. And this stayed with me throughout the years. And I wouldn't say it advanced much beyond just wanting to have good sound at home and listening, enjoying music. And till I joined actually Microsoft. We had a startup in California that was doing streaming on the web when the web was still dial-up modems and what have you. And Microsoft acquired the company and we moved up. And I was thinking about what to do inside Microsoft. And I decided to focus on audio video at Microsoft, but more than just developing it inside Windows and Microsoft, but to also get the consumer electronics industry to adopt the same. So built a large group, about 40 people, researchers, PhD, and then engineers who built audio video technologies. And then we would develop these audio video formats and algorithms, and then I would go and meet with all the major companies, trying to get them to license this stuff and make their devices compatible with Windows. And that sort of made my audiophile hobby all of a sudden part of my everyday jobs. My group would develop a new encoder. I would encode my music with it. I'd do A/B tests, blind or sighted. And I would give them feedback on how to improve this stuff. And pretty soon developed very acute hearing skills for detecting very, very small impairments, tiny distortions that most people can't hear. I was sort of the guy that had to finally prove. So the codec team would go run all their tests and everything. Then they would say, Amir, what do you think? Are we better than the last release or not? And I would listen. I said, oh, no, we're right here in this one clip. There's one guitar string. Listen, there's a bit of distortion there. And they would go and fix it. So the two sort of joined. And at the same time, I became very active on forums, because that's where I think most of the information is these days on, where audio video is.
Are you an electrical engineer by education?
Yes. So I grew up with electronics, as I said, and naturally for me, it was like, it's written in blood that I was going to be an electrical engineer. Right. And so I got my electrical engineering degree, but I graduated in 82, and the year I graduated, there was a recession in the US, and I sent out a resume to all the computer companies where I lived in Florida. And the computer company answered back and said, we don't have any hardware jobs, but we do have some software jobs. I said, what's a software job? Come work on this operating system called Unix. And that's the granddaddy of Linux, which people use today. I said, oh, we've had Unix at the university. I've been playing with it. They're like, really? You know about Unix? I said, yeah. So I went in, quickly got the job because, nobody could spell the product at the time. And this company was making $300,000 computers and wanted to put Unix on it. So I went in there and worked on the Unix kernel, the operating system, the core of the whole thing. And it was a fantastic learning environment, one of the first Ethernet controllers in the world, one of the first file sharing algorithms in the world, and really rose up through the ranks in the 80s. And that led to a job working for Sony in the workstation division, computer division from 89 to 94. And then from there on, I went out. At Sony, I managed both hardware and software development. So I managed to develop, manage development, both, LSI technology and then analog power supplies, everything. So it gave me a very good A to Z, real knowledge of everything that's involved in the stuff we're dealing with. And then worked for a couple of broadcast television companies, companies that made editing software, Avid Electronics, if you've heard of them, and others. And then we did a startup that was around doing video on the internet, as I mentioned, slow dial-ups with Stanford spinoff. And that was 96, 97, and we sold out to Microsoft. And the condition of the sale was that, all the executives had to come up to Seattle. So we moved from San Francisco area up here and focus on bringing video on the internet. And it's remarkable. I watched the video today, we're watching this high resolution, high definition video. And, we were doing postage stamp videos that would update every, 3 or 4 frames a second to be here versus broadcast quality. So it's been fun. But for the last, I'd say 10 or 15 years, my hobby and my job have been one and the same. I said when I was at Microsoft. So I left Microsoft about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, did a startup that we then sold off. And then I was looking for things to do, and audio science review is one of those.
Okay. So is it safe to say that financially you're retired today?
Yeah. I was fortunate enough, tell people after 35 years of working like a dog, Christmas, holidays, night and day, and, taking code with you at home, finally, the world was kind enough to make us a couple of dollars so we can live, comfortably. So so audio science review is not a business, didn't create it to make money off of it, what have you. So, and that puts me in a unique position to do these things, because trying to solve this economic problem of how do you create a business like what I do, it doesn't exist today. So that's why it doesn't exist. You either do advertising, magazines, what have you, or you don't do it, or you do hobbyist, very light level, kind of thing online. To do a serious one where you invest so much money in equipment and expertise and, energy just doesn't exist today.
Do you believe that your passion and your intellectual interest is really what drives you? Yeah,
I'm what I call myself very goal-oriented. There's a difference between sailors and power boaters. Power boaters want to go to the destination, and they don't care about all the noise and crap that the boat produces. Sailors like the quiet, and they want to get to, from the journeys, everything. Right. I'm the first one. I'm the powerboat guy. I want to get to the end, get it done. And in this case, I'm just frustrated that if you want to go buy a piece of audio equipment, there's not much independent, reliable information about that audio equipment. You may get lucky, find a review here and there or a measurement, but really there's not a whole lot out there. I want to get to a point where either the industry does it or there are enough people like me do it, where 9 out of 10 things you want to buy, there is good information about it, and you can make a purchase decision based on that information rather than the looks or the marketing or what people say about it.
Sure. Would you consider yourself a objectivist 100%?
No. I look at a spectrum of, minus 100 to plus 100. I'd say I'm at 80% there. Okay. I obviously believes in a lot of these things. Let me tell you what I think the 100% guy is. The 100% guy says, look, this stuff's all the same all the time under all conditions, and every listener is just as bad as the next one, can't hear worth a damn. So 60 dB of dynamic range is good enough. The $5, AliExpress stack is good enough. Everything must be good enough. And there's some elements of truth to that. But I said, look, I've taken a lot of these tests that people said are impossible to pass, double blind, and I can pass them. So there are people like me, that at least trained listeners, that can hear better than the average person. But more importantly, where we are with electronics is that we can design very, very high fidelity equipment for the same cost as we can design a crappy one. Right. Just move a few components around in a DAC, cost the same, and things can get better or it can get worse. Why would you want to go and buy the crappy one? Maybe you can't tell difference. Maybe your buddy can't tell difference either. But my job is to find those devices and also to reward those companies that put in right engineering and designing these things. So I stay at 80% because I said, don't take it to the extreme, because the extreme, it's just silliness. And I said, then why are you even listening or wondering in any forum or any place? You're saying the world is, the problem fully solved and go away. And I also believe in some areas like speakers and especially headphones, the measurement science is good, but it's not as perfect as we want it to be. So even though I have extensive measurements with speakers, I still listen. And sometimes I can hear things. So this is a distortion, or the speaker can't play loud enough, what have you. So I put some value in that. And that gets me grief on the forum. People come back and say, why are you even posting anything subjective? Why are you even listening? I'm like, well, I do it because somebody's got to compare the two notes. And wouldn't you like it to be me? Because I have the measurement, I have the speaker, I have everything. Let me do it. But it gets me grief because there are people that are very purist in that. And I'd say I feel like the community at ASR at least has moved somewhat towards me, in that the ones that were super hardcore before, they at least humor me and allow 10 to 20%, pull back on that one. But still way out there. So if you come tell me, I took out a cable, plug in the other one, and sounded night and day difference, I'd say, whoa, let's have you do that blind. And by the way, I'll put $1,000 on the table if you can pass that with a video shooting you doing that 8 out of 10 times. I'll give it $1,000. I'll give it $2,000. Do it. So I believe that much in the science engineer. It's not just challenge the guy thinking he'll never do it on this thing. So I think there is goodness in having some amount of openness on other things we need to look at.
You mentioned an AP analyzer. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, you can see it partially over here. So back in 1970s and 80s, there's classic large instrument test and instrument companies called Tektronix, and at that time Hewlett-Packard. Hewlett-Packard sold the group and exchanged hands, became Agilent. Keysight is their latest name. And these companies traditionally had also built audio analyzers. They built oscilloscopes and things like you can see back there. And but since you needed measurement gear for audio, they'd also built that. And they charge through the nose for these things. And they don't make anything at that time that wasn't $20,000, $30,000. So they had these distortion analyzers. They were mono. They had their own primitive user interface dials and things, little crude display. A company startup in California came about. I think they came from HP. They quit and decided to build an audio analyzer where the user interface was a computer program connected with a data cable to the analyzer, and the analyzer was this black box, just like more or less you see here, and it would gather the data and then hand it off to the PC, and the PC then uses power with graphics and nice user interface. Well, overnight, they took over the market. I remember buying the first one at Sony, and nobody at Sony even knew or heard of this thing, and bought one of the earliest ones when I was at Microsoft. And over time, this company really put those guys out of business. HP and Tech and all the other guys got out of that business. Maybe you can still find some, a few dedicated analyzers, but basically, they were just killed. And HP and Audio Precision, which we call AP for short, has sort of owns this market. Now, these guys weren't going to sell stuff cheap either. These are specialized gear. They don't sell millions of them. So the premier system they have, which is what I have, the APX 555, has a list price of $28,000. And unfortunately for the world, you need their top-of-the-line analyzer. This one, because of DAX and other products we measure, even amplifiers, have gotten so good that the analyzer, has to have enough headroom to be above them. And this is the only analyzer that does it. They have a model that's APX 525. That one is $15,000, but it's at or below, they have a $99 DAC. And then they have a few $1,000 one. So unfortunately, it limits, who can have this thing. A lot of companies design audio products without it because it's too expensive, even though companies that sell a few $1 million a year. Well, they've learned the hard way now that they have to go get one because I'm going to test their stuff. And I better not be the first guy who tells them how their stuff works.
And we're going to get
Yeah, I wish there was a $2,000 option where you could just do what this thing does. But it's a precision instrument. Does clever things to get the performance that it has. And unfortunately, it's an expensive box.
Do you believe that you're qualified to use it?
Yeah, like I said, the first one I bought was for Sony in 1991.
Okay.
And then I bought one when I was at Microsoft, 97 or something. If you look at these boxes, the question is, are you an operator or do you understand what the box does?
Correct.
electrical engineer, understand signal processing, understand electronic circuits, understand everything from grounding to, and by the way, my team at Microsoft developed the entire audio video stack in Windows. So I understand the pipelines, understand, WASAPI interface and things like that you may have heard came out of my team. So there's not an aspect of this thing from A to Z that I don't understand.
Okay.
Can I go design this myself? No, I'm not that hands-on anymore to go and have the patience to design that kind of thing. But there's not a thing that this thing does that I don't understand. I know its limitations. And more than that, I have incredible experience with it. Just last year alone, I did 270 measurements and reviews with this analyzer. And I've got all my tests created as templates. I'll bring up a template. The parameters are set. Cable it up, measure. So, unless I swap the cables or something, in that sense, it's hard to screw up. But of course, the people don't want to believe in the data will come out and say, who's this Amir guy? Is he Einstein? If he's not Einstein, and I haven't heard of him, he must not know what he's doing. He's an online blogger.
Sure.
I'm like, no.
Do you have any patents?
I do. There are two types of managers that I know. The type of manager who wants to always have their name as a co-inventor with their team, and we have those people that have hundreds of patents. And there are people like me who didn't want that. So I would brainstorm with my team, and they would go patent things, and I wouldn't. But a few times they were very nice, and they came back to me, you really had this idea. We want to put your name as an inventor too. I'm like, thank you very much. Go ahead. So I think there are 3 patents in my name when I was at Microsoft, and there was one at VExtreme. I don't know, the startup that we did. I don't know if that one ever made it. When I left Microsoft, I wasn't there anymore for them to go pursue this. There's 2 or 3 there. Okay. One is on compression of voice and music simultaneously. It's a clever scheme. Traditional compression algorithms are either designed for music, and they run on high bit rates, or they're designed for voice because of the way our vocal cord works. You can take advantage of that and build better algorithms than the ones that are for music. But the music ones are not good the voice ones are not good for music. So when you're on hold, used to be that you hear background music was really scratchy. Yep. So I worked with my team, come up with a scheme where we would classify the sound and detect whether it was music or voice, and it would switch between the 2 algorithms dynamically, and you couldn't tell. So that solved the big problem, because we were trying to get a voice codec to be good on music, and it just was not working. So it's patents like that, and there's some on watermarking and some other ones.
Okay. So you're qualified to use this AP analyzer. Now, do you feel as though it's important to have other people measure the same equipment to back up your measurements to show that your data is in fact legitimate data?
Let me say that has already happened a few times, because people made this point, and we have others who've done that. But you got to know something about me. I'm the kind of person that wants to do 95% of something. The last 5% doesn't interest me. It is true that if you gave me a DAC and I came up with this performance, to know for sure if your unit is going to have the same performance, maybe I need to measure 50 of them, right? Not even 2 or 3. I may have to buy from all different places, and maybe they give me a golden sample. I'd say, yep, 5% doubt exists. Maybe you get a crappy one. We are helped by the fact that a lot of these things have no moving parts, have no adjustments in them, and they're used surface mount parts. They're very reliable, small. So I'd say the variations are so small as to not be worrying about. The guy doing reviews cars, he doesn't get 10 cars and do all 0-60 and all 10 of them to prove that his numbers are right. Is that concern there? Yes. And occasionally people have bought me other units and sent them to me. Like I measured the Master-Up THX amplifier at the time, best performance by far. Somebody says, hey, maybe this is a lie. Can I buy another one, send it to you? Like, sure. We had this other DAC from SMSML. Somebody in China measured it. He says, as temperature changes, it all screws up. I went spent $400 of my own money, bought another one, and tested it. So I'd say I don't know. I have not seen enough evidence to make it worth my while to go retest all these other ones, or some poor other person to sit there and redo my work. Okay. I know you interviewed Aaron. I measured the speaker. I then sent it to, he sent me the speaker to measure using my system, and then I sent it to him, and he measured it using a completely different system and arrived at very similar results. So enough of these things have happened where anybody who knows me no longer points to these things. But it's good that you ask, because people who don't know me, they have this idea that, you have to go do all those things. This is a science experiment, therefore science has to be replicated. I tell them that none of this is about science. Testing a product to see if it passes a signal is engineering test. I'm not inventing new science to require the science to be proven. I test it. Now, manufacturer, if they think it's wrong, hey, they could measure it. Send me your data. Show me your data is different. And we worked. Benchmark did that. I measured their DAC, had a little bit of a jitter and a little bit of linearity problem. They immediately contacted me and said, that can't be. We tested ourselves. Can you send us yours? And we send you one to test. I sent them mine at the loaner unit, and I got one of theirs. Theirs didn't do, the second one didn't do it, and they said they couldn't find a problem. But I was willing to do the extra work. They were willing to do the extra work. So if anybody worries about these things, put in some effort yourself. Go buy a unit, send it to me, I'll retest. But don't just sit there and sort of complain about it. It's not going to do us any good.
Is the AP test, when you hook up a DAC, for instance, do you have your templates where it's fully automated? So
No.
it's no.
So it's semi-automated in that when you can make a test, and I save the test as a template, which means I can recall a test for jitter. Pulls it up, ready to say, I say go, it goes. You have to tell it which input it's using, balance or not, but it goes. Then I have the separate test for, let's say I run 8 different tests for DAC. Each one of those is profiled that way. I could string them all up and press one go, and it would run 8 of them. I could then run 50 other ones too, make it look impressive. I don't like to do that. I like to run one test and look at it. Say, is this right? Is this smelling good? Why is there so much noise? 60 hertz noise. Maybe I need to fix the grounding. So I always run what I call a dashboard. Gives me distortion, signal levels, waveforms. I look at it and I'm like, is this right? Is this right? Okay, then I'll go to the next test. So it's time consuming. A DAC would take me probably an hour and a half to 2 hours just to run these tests one at a time, look at them, save the graphics, put them in Photoshop, annotate them to go at it. So, and that's the way I like it. Even though I could go a lot faster, I could make it 5 minutes. I just feel like the quality won't be there. You won't catch mistakes in there. So it's automated enough that I can't make silly mistakes, like change the bandwidth of a test or change the frequency of from 1 kHz to 10 kHz. I mean, those are deadly mistakes. Those I avoid. But beyond that, I say they're sort of, handcrafted, suite of tests. And I sometimes create new tests because there's something strange. I'm like, oh, let me run a spectrum test to see what's going on.
Have you ever had an instance where you test a product and it's such a poor performer that when you post it on the forum as a review, that manufacturer contacts you about it?
Yeah, different versions. Many versions of that has happened. There's one class of manufacturer who doesn't contact me, but he goes elsewhere on another forum and badmouths me. It's like, here he does. Who the hell is this guy? He doesn't know anything. Then some of the time they post their own measurements are different. And so we've had this thing happen. This was a company called Shed that did that originally, but they've managed to completely turn around where they adopted, proper testing. Now they give me their launch products. Oftentimes I get their products before anybody else to test because now they measure them, they do it properly. Benchmark I talked about, they reached out to me and gave me their products to test. I'd say it happens quite often where I'm surprised that they know me and they're oftentimes members of the forum. So that, I didn't even know, all of a sudden I get this person's name with their company name, say, hey, I'm so-and-so from this company, you just post this measurement. This is, we didn't know. We're going to go back and take a look at it, or this is our data. This is what our engineers tell us. Can we send you another unit? What have you. So Denon is one company, I've measured their AVRs, found this down mixing issue. Next thing you know, Denon Europe, their top engineer from there contacted me, Amir. They were very afraid that I'm ready to, fight. I'm like, well, I want nothing better than you resolving this problem. That's my interest, because then everybody benefits. Multiple conference calls. They send me other units. We worked on tests. I would do a test, refine. We both investigated what the issues were. he was a conduit to the Japanese team, and things got resolved. But I said more often than not, still, companies just put their fingers in their ears, will not care. Tested a Pioneer, AVR, poor performance, send them a link. Never heard back. Don't care.
So out of 100%, let's say we're talking 2%, 3% at most will contact you to try to improve the product, right?
Yeah. Yep. Good or bad, by the way. Some of the good ones, I send them link to them, say, hey, your product was great. I don't hear back on that either. Many times. It's like these companies are so removed from, their communities.
Now let's start with SCHIT. And for anybody listening that doesn't know, it's SCHITT audio. They did a play on the name, obviously.
Yeah.
And that's Mike Moffat and Jason Stoddard, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
Okay. And they are, Amir, correct me if I'm wrong, from the original Theta company,
yes.
Correct?
Yeah.
So they develop these products out in California, and one of their biggest claims to fame is that they're American designed and made, right?
Correct.
They literally changed their quality control along with their engineering design because of your measurements. Is that indeed true?
Based on everything I know, I like to take 100% credit for that. But obviously, they had to do all the work. But we provided the motivation. I think they could have fought us forever, and they fought a very hard fight. And to their credit, they said, let's behind the scene, we can design great products too, just like these other no-name companies are doing. Let's just go buy the analyzer. Let's build great measuring products. They didn't have a good analyzer. They had success without it. So why change anything, right? They would do a listening test. The stuff sounds good. Hey, great. And they had a really primitive measurement that just told them that it wasn't broken. And that was good enough. Again, $28,000 for a box. You don't go buy it unless you have to. So they bought the box. And these guys obviously know design and know design very well. They just didn't know what to measure and how to measure. And that measurements mattered for market success.
Do they contact you on a semi-regular basis about new products and how you measure to maybe just to get some input on what they maybe should measure based on the quantity of product? No. Okay.
No. They develop their own automated suite of what they run.
Okay.
They've never asked feedback from me. Obviously, my tests are there, and they may have replicated them or may not. They run them similar enough tests, and they actually publish those tests. That is good enough what they're doing. There's no real secret sauce in here if you know how to use the box. Right. My contact is neither one of the two gentlemen you mentioned, by the way, that we got, which was smart of them. Let's pick somebody new doesn't have any history, even though it was going to be fine with me. I have a different person, and he's just a joy to work with. Very, very nice individual, and works on, he also answers questions on the forum. And I'm really appreciative of the fact that they design two classes of products now. The ones that they know will put a smile on my face, and the ones that they put a smile on other people's faces. They especially come to me, obviously, when they design something for our audience. And sometimes they give me the other ones too, but in general, they've been great at saying, Amir, we're going to announce this next Tuesday. Can we send one to you? And there's an embargo till then. Can you test it? I'm like, absolutely. Send it to me. I'll test it. You'll give me the okay, and I'll publish it. So, and I've gone from not trusting them on anything to very much trusting them. People, again, accuse them just as well, send golden samples or what have you. I go by my sixth sense of, how is this relationship? How is this person reacting? And the level of honesty that I see from them is extremely high, and I'm happy with it.
That's great. And I think it's also worth pointing out as well that Mike Moffat and Jason Stoddard would not let their employee speak with you if they weren't supportive, right?
Yes.
Even though you don't speak with them directly, they certainly wouldn't allow one of their employees to speak with you if they weren't supportive.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. It wouldn't have happened. And I think they needed to establish a channel, and might as well pick a person with no history with me. And they just happened to pick the perfect person for it too, that had the right temperament to work with me, and it's worked out great. So yeah, absolutely. And
compliment and to that employee as well.
Yeah. I mean, it just takes a lot to do what they did.
Right.
On this thing. And again, I don't want to minimize the work they had to do to build all new products. And they did it very quickly. They've gone back and redesigned a whole bunch of products this way very quickly. We're talking 1 year probably from start to finish. And we got a range of new products with incredible performance with the same prices, by the way. Same $99 DAC. Now it's 30, 40 dB better performance in noise and distortion. So they truly know what they're doing. And, it takes a lot of engineering to do that.
Do you believe that 30 to 40 dB is audible?
Probably not to most people. Otherwise, they would have never sold anything before. I have a range I use, and I say average audiophile probably can't hear. And we have the SINET score, which is the noise burst distortion, and state of the art DACs are at 120. Garbage ones are around 40, 45. I think once you get to 50, 60 dB, you lose a ton of audiophiles. I don't care how good they think their ears are. Our ears are tuned to what I call linear variations, like frequency response. We all hear that variation equally. But when it comes to distortion, we don't know what to listen for. And there's a lot of masking, other perceptual things that stop us from finding those things. But there are critical listeners who do better than that. I'd say you can go from 60 to 70. Then from 70 dB on up, it gets very hard. We can mathematically show that even 90, 95 dB, you can hear the hiss at least that's there. So I'd say up to 90, 100 dB, we're talking that very, very close to even the best listeners can hear. Now, why do you need 120? It's because these things all cascade and add up together, especially noise, and you could wind up with audible hiss at the end. And so I like to see the best people can do within the budget that they have. But yeah, otherwise, I'd say nobody would buy these products. There's a lot of broken products out there. If people could hear how bad they are, they would never buy them.
One, improve their hearing to be like yourself without becoming a Harman employee?
There's two parts to that, actually. Harman trained listeners are different than the kind of training I'm talking about. Harman trained listeners are good at tonality and explaining that tonality. So you play music that's gone through two different speakers, they can tell you, no, I think this is around 2000 hertz is too much or too little.
Right.
That is an average person may say, something's not right about this, but they wouldn't be able to tell you there's 2000 hertz and it's, too much there. So their training, which their software is available, by the way, you can listen. And I find that you can get trained fairly quickly on that. Most people, it has different levels like a game. First time I ran it, I failed at level 2 or 3. Then I played with it for, few hours and I got to level 5 or 6. And if I play with it more, I could get up there.
The name of that
is called How to Listen. Harman, How to Listen. If you Google for that, either on Audio Science Review, you can find it, or they have a website for it in Harman, and Sean Olive has it on his blog. But it's Windows software you download. It will change the equalization of a piece of music, and your job is to say which one of these changes was it. And it keeps narrowing down the range of changes is made in the frequency range. So when it gets narrow, it's very hard to identify. The type of training I'm talking about doesn't come on a platter like that, unfortunately. It's for hearing small nonlinearities, small impairments. Encode some MP3 music at 320 kilobits per second and compare to the original blind. If you can't tell the difference, you don't have that skill. So that's the easy one, actually, because MP3 is not perceptually transparent, so you should be able to tell at all rate. AAC codec is much harder. So for me, even AAC is much of a challenge. But if I focus enough, I can find it. So it took me about 6 months of training myself. And the way it works is that you start with where the artifacts are extremely high, and you learn the algorithms. You learn what to look for. Turns out with lossy compression is transients that get what is called pre-echo. There's a little bit of scratchy noise sort of gets added to the front of it. And you listen for that, you listen for that, you listen for that. You gradually get better and better where there you can keep reducing the level of distortion and you keep practicing until you get to a point where you can, in double-blind tests, you can hear extremely small impairments that other people can't. An amazing thing happens when you do that in that domain is that you become what I call a critical listener. I have two modes of operation. I can enjoy music, lay back and listen, or I can become this person that just keeps peeling off every note down to milliseconds saying, how did that happen? How did that happen? Play it again, play it again, play it again. And that ability is not normal, it's not natural. Now, I don't recommend that you develop that ability because your mind will switch to that mode sometimes. I'm in a car, all of a sudden, I'm hearing compression artifacts of, from the other end. I know they're using some kind of lossy compression, and it gets in the way, and you get annoyed. So now, that said, I think audiophiles, if you're serious about this hobby, you have to become a critical listener. You have to know how to do that instrumentation brain kind of thing where you try to find what you're listening for, because otherwise it's just this blur and you're just randomly guessing. And that's not useful to finding the best thing that's around. Sure. I'd say it's like people who speak multiple languages. They learn another one very easily. And similar thing like this, you have to develop your brain to want to be in this analysis mode.
What do you say to the critics that will say, or they'll ask you, have you had a hearing test? How often do you do that, and how is it?
Sure. I had my hearing test last done 2 years ago. Depressing news, high frequency roll off. Good news was that mid frequencies was better, and they show me the graph. And they're like, look over here, you're rolling off, so you have nerve damage or age-related nerve damage. I said, well, how about in the middle? Basically, the graph is how much are you from general population? I said, the middle looks like I'm going above. They're like, yeah, you're better than average there. I'm like, hey, wait a second. That's important. It's fascinating in that 90% of the artifacts we talked about are not impacted by losing high-frequency hearing, but 10% of them are. And I remember bringing one of our partners to Microsoft, and he had a bug in our encoder, and we couldn't hear it. I couldn't hear it. My team couldn't hear it. We brought him in our demo room and set up the thing. And I said, look, I can't hear it. These guys can't. The guy's like, you can't hear that? I'm like, no. You can't hear that? I'm like, no. And he's much younger than me. I was like, and so I told my team, I said, go see if you can find this bug. They wouldn't have found the bug. So he was hearing it. And so there are things I can't hear. But for whatever, reason, I still have enough skills, much above average skills in finding artifacts below, 15 kHz, 14 kHz, 12 kHz. By the way, very disappointing. You can't get higher frequency listening to hearing tests. When I asked them, I said, I want to test it at 20 kHz. They said, no, we can't do 20 kHz. We have it at a hospital for cancer patients. For some cancers, it's useful. But he was like, no, I think 8 kHz is as high as they go. Yeah, I was like, really? I was really looking forward to having a high resolution test. So on this thing. But so most of the research also indicates that as people get older, they're still very useful in this role. But for like testing speakers and things, Harman excludes you if you can't hear, all the way up to the top octave.
You mentioned before about manufacturers sending a gold sample, right? And just to clarify what you mean about that, can you explain that?
Sure. So there are different definitions for it, but in this context is I take 10 of them off the assembly line and I measure them using the same instrument the reviewer is using. They have an analyzer like this, and pick the one with the least noise and least distortion. When you buy electronic components, they have a bell-shaped distribution curve of their performance. And there are parts that are a little bit better than others. And so when you put 1,000 components together, it's a random luck of basically what combination you wind up. So some will have ever so slightly better performance. So there's this race right now who can get to 121, 122 dB SINAT. So I can imagine somebody pull a bunch of them. One is 119, one is 120, and the other one's 120.5. We'll send the 120.5 to me. My answer to that is, so what? If you get the 119, it's way better than you can hear anyway. But that's what a golden sample in this cases. There's also a manufacturing concept, a golden sample, which is you take one unit and that you know is good, and you put it on an assembly line, and everything gets compared to that. So when they measure every unit that they build, they say, okay, every day we're going to measure that unit first, and we use that as a plus or minus 10% of that as the good enough range.
And that's often referred to as the gold standard.
Golden sample or the gold standard. Gold standard is got a larger context of what a meter is, or what have you. But it's in this case called the golden sample. It's a jargon that's been sort of translated to mean the handpicked stuff for the reviewers now, to mean the same thing.
What made you get into testing speakers?
One message online. From one of us. First, I was happy that I wasn't testing speakers. I was testing these little DACs. Then it got to be these big amplifiers, AVRs, and it was breaking my back. And I remember having a thread where we all I gloated over how great it is that I'm not doing speakers. And I was like, how am I going to store all this stuff? These things are wooden. They could break. The people who test these things must be stupid. And then one day, one of the senior members posts, he says, we're doing so many tests of these electronics, but they're so good, most of them, but we're not testing the two things that are not close to perfect, which is headphones and speakers. I'm a kind of guy, and I say I go long as a straight line, and then I change in an instant. And on that moment, I went from hell no to I have to do this, because what he just said is 100% correct.
Right.
What helped was that I'd been to an audio show, and I remember seeing Klippel, which is this number one instrument maker for speakers and transducers and so forth. And I remember walking into a room and I see this robotic thing with all these, fixtures and everything. I said, what do you guys do? What is this? They're like, oh, we can test speakers. I was like, okay, see you guys later. And I left. But in the back of my mind, I remember they had that. I was like, I think that thing eliminated the need for anechoic chamber. And if that's the case, then maybe I can reproduce, that kind of thing. So I contacted them. They have a great U.S. distributor, very helpful. But their first question was, how much money you have? These things are not cheap. So how expensive is it? $50,000 is the starting price. I was like, whoa, that's already over my budget. Then they came back and said, that's just the sum of the hardware. Just the one software license is $30,000. I was like, oh, no. What's the total? $110,000. I was like, oh, you're kidding me. And I thought I wouldn't do it. But like I said, I'm the binary person on this thing. And I said, I have to do it. So I spent a few months doing due diligence, contacting companies that had these things. Does this really, really work? And the answer was that, yeah, it works. Just costs a ton of money. You could sit there manually move a speaker 10 degrees at a time, or you go buy this thing and it automates it in 2 hours and gives you the stuff. So I bit the bullet, tons of paperwork, importing this from Germany, massive craze, 300 pounds or something, 330 pounds. Took days to assemble it and get it going, but never looked back. I mean, from the first time I measured the speaker with it, it's just, replaces $1 million anechoic chamber and gives you very reliable data. So,
and it's called the Klippel Near Field Scanner, correct?
That's right. And the reason it's called NFS is that traditionally, when you measure a speaker, you want to measure what is called a far field, so that the drivers all integrate and you get one sound field coming at you. Otherwise, if you move just a little bit, you may hear, different mix of the tweeter and woofer and what have you. So this is actually a problem even in anechoic chamber, because you put a speaker in an anechoic chamber, then you go far enough back, and the taller the speaker is, the farther you got to go back. So even in anechoic chamber, they have a problem where they can't go far enough back, because the chamber would get too expensive to build a big one. So they make a compromise, usually about 2 meters is they measured this thing and then reported 1 meter. And this thing came up with the concept of there's actually two innovations. So one says, look, we're not going to measure from when everything's sound field is unified. We're going to go measure before that happens, but we're going to measure 1,000, 2,000 points around. Based on those 1,000, 2,000 points, we're going to build a mathematical model of how the sound wave is expanding from there on. So there's your tweeter, there's woofer and all that stuff. It doesn't care how the sound field got generated, but we can sample this enough and solve these wave equations that then tell us how sound propagates to any point from that then on. I could tell you 10 meters, 20 meters, 3 meters. So it does that. So it scans around the speaker 360 degrees and spirals up, and it gives you that. So that's the first innovation. Why do you want to do that in near field? Because the microphone becomes a lot more sensitive in picking up the speaker sound, and you can ignore the room noise. So you no longer need an absolutely quiet room. Anechoic chambers, not only are they anechoic, they're also dead silent. They're room inside a room, inside a room, suspended so that the outside noise can't go in there. This thing, the microphone, I can set it to be, 6 inches. It creates some problems if you go that close. But let's say I'm measuring at 20 inches. So I'm way shorter. So if there's a noise in the street, it's way weaker than the signal between the speaker. So it helps with the signal noise ratio. The second thing is this, what's called field separation. Instead of doing one set of measurements, you do 2 sets of measurements. So there's 2 layers replicating each other at 2 different points in time. Because you have 2 points in time, you can tell whether the sound originated from here, hit this point, and then hit this point, versus the sound has hit a wall and it's come back. Based on that, you can then separate the reflections from the direct sound of the speaker, giving you anechoic results. Those 2 things combined give you better results than an anechoic chamber now. Because the anechoic chamber, remember I said it's not big enough, and anechoic chambers aren't anechoic down to 20 hertz. Because 20 hertz, you're talking 20, 30 feet wavelengths, and those wedges they have are for you 4 feet, 5 feet. They're not deep enough to absorb 20 hertz. So people actually buy this and put it in anechoic chambers to get even better results than you could. So there's more to it than this, but there's sort of a high-level elevator pitch of it.
Does the Klippel NFS system test to standards?
Yes. So Harman, before Harman, so Dr. Floyd Toole and Sean Olive, when they worked at the National Research Council in Canada, they developed a set of measurements. They said it's better than just one frequency response. Why don't we do on-axis frequency, but we also measure at different points, and then we sum those together into more meaningful measurements, so you're not having to deal with a ton of data. They brought that research with them to Harman, and both while at NRC and at Harman, they did tons of papers on this stuff. But one other thing they did, Dr. Floyd Toole did, was I took these things to a Consumer Electronics Association, CEA, and said, why don't you guys make this a standard? Actually, I don't know who went to whom, but basically CEA took that work and turned it into a standard. Then that became a CTA standard and eventually got elevated to an ANSI, American National Standards Institute. So it became a formal ANSI standard. We call this spinorama is what Harman called them, but the formal name is CEA 2034 or CTA 2034. So it's fully standardized. There are little holes in the specification, and we actually found the holes. We, as the community, with my measurements, when we followed the standard, found out what they've written and what is there didn't match. Klippel software had to be changed. And Klippel actually has this cant measurement that complies with that thing. So they fixed a few things, and we discovered workarounds for the rest. So the straight measurements that come out for speakers absolutely is standardized, and that's what we publish. So you can run it by some other method and compare the results.
By measuring a speaker, can you get similar results to that NFS system with on-axis measurements like many speaker manufacturers do only?
From mid to high frequencies, you can do it on a shoestring budget. You do what's called gating. You don't allow the reflection to come back at you. You just measure till that reflection could come back at you and you stop. There's a thing in signal processing that comes to bite you behind. It says the moment you do that, there's a thing called the uncertainty principle. You can either have resolution in time or frequency, but not both. So when you chop down the time, make it short, you lose frequency resolution. When you lose frequency resolution, everything below 200 to 300 hertz looks like this smooth line that doesn't show you the ups and downs in bass. So from few hundred hertz up, you can actually just stick a microphone with any even free software and make a measurement of speaker that's darn good. But below a few hundred hertz, you have to go to an anechoic chamber or use this near field scanner, or go outside, hang a speaker up on a pole, and measure it. And it's pain in the neck if you want to measure off axis because you got to then rotate the speaker.
Right.
On axis, yeah, it's just one measure.
Now, would you say even if you go outside and you hang the speaker up, call it 10 feet up in the air, and you rotate the speaker every 10 degrees off axis, that quality of data is going to match the NFS?
Let me step back and say nothing will ever match. There is small difference of 1 dB or so will be there. And I have worked with Neumann on their anechoic chamber, and we got very, very close. But that was a heroic effort. In general, it doesn't. I think the spec allows plus or minus 2 dB or something. You're still golden. But yeah, correlation will be there. There's a dip in 2 kilohertz. You'll see a dip. You better see that on that thing. There are problems with outside measurements. Noise is one of them. Temperature and humidity is another one, causes phase shifts and so forth. And by the way, 10 feet is not enough. You need to go way up high. And if you want it super accurate down to 20 hertz, you need one of those cranes that elevate the stuff or go on a roof or something. But yeah, that is actually the gold standard outdoor. If there's no noise and temperature and other things are not interfering, and there's nothing around you 400 feet,
right?
That is called free field, and that is indeed the gold standard. But anechoic chambers are not that good. NFS tries to be good. It has its own limitations at times. If a sound feels extremely complicated, NFS can't model it because there are too much variations. Ironically, some cheap, crappy speakers may be that way. If they have a lot of diffraction and tons of little crappy drivers and everything, every one of those becomes a little sound source, and they all generate a very complex feel. You can solve it by measuring with more points, but I run 1,000 points on the average, and that takes 2.5 hours. 2,000 points takes 4.5 hours. And you also got wear and tear on this expensive machine. So, it gets complicated. They have another solution where you can measure things independently and sum them up on this thing. So nothing is perfect or compromise it, but for what we do, NFS is extremely accurate.
I think it's also important to clarify, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you say nothing is perfect. However, the NFS is more perfect than A, not doing anything, or B, doing something very elementary in a garage, and doing gated measurements and not seeing the full picture, correct?
Absolutely. I'll call it hobbyist measurements. You stick a microphone, you gate it. Anybody can do that. Unfortunately, they're major. There are a lot of speaker companies, and that's all they do. They come back and say, our measurement's different. I said, how'd you do it? Oh, we did a gated measurement. I'm like, that's not accurate.
And can you explain when someone such as Harman, I've seen it firsthand, has a speaker hanging from a crane, how high they have it?
They have an indoor, the largest room I've seen that they have is JBL and the array speakers. And those, I said, the building that I was there, I don't know what the height was, at least 5 or 6 stories high, and they had a boom and a crane and hanging this massive, JBL arrays, the stadium speakers and everything, and they test them in there. The anechoic chambers I've been in aren't that large. Well, they're larger than most people's, but they're not that large, so you have to use other techniques for that. But I'd say probably the fanciest ones. Microsoft's got the quietest anechoic chamber. Apple, I think, has got a great chamber. It's all right. These companies have actually more money than a company like Harman would or Sony would, whatever. You think the AV companies aren't that rich.
Amazing.
You need to get a computer company. They have, Microsoft one is the quietest room in the world. Why they need the quietest room in the world? I'm sure they did not, but budget's there. You go spend $2 million and it gets done. So.
Do you test for manufacturers? Will you test manufacturers' speakers?
No, it hasn't happened yet.
Okay.
A couple of companies have approached me saying, we got this speaker. Do you mind measuring it? I'm like, if I have a relationship with them and I know them, I'm like, oh, what is it? and there's one guy they showed me. I'm like, oh, that's a neat thing. Sure, I'll do it. But I absolutely don't want this to become a job. People say, hey, why don't you recoup the money by doing this kind of testing? I'm like, look, I used to make good money per hour. I could go back and doing that. And it's not this drudgery of going and sticking the speaker in there and running these tests. Right. This is manual labor, and I'll make a fraction of that money. And, they have a distributor in the US that also has a lab. They can do a measurement like I have for $1,500 to $2,000. I'm like, go do that, on this thing. So, but no, electronics, once somebody asked me to do the testing for them, and I did. Okay. And that was it. For whatever reason, people haven't come and asked me about it either. And I'm surprised, frankly. I'm like, you don't have your own box. But maybe they think this stuff's not released, don't want to trust somebody like me. I don't know. But I don't seek it out either.
Would you work contracts with whether it's an electronics company or a speaker company where you did do their testing, though, but it wasn't published?
I've done some unpublished tests.
You have?
Yeah. Let me give you different scenarios of how to test products.
Please.
I buy this stuff. I buy it. Stuff comes. I test it. I don't give a damn. Who else needs to know? It's my product. I tested it. People say, hey, why don't you contact the company before you publish the result? I'm like, it's my thing. I bought it on Amazon. I tested it. That's it. Second one is that's probably 5% these days. 85% or more is people send me gear. Send me the gear. I test it. It's for their benefit and other people. I publish it. Occasionally, manufacturers will send me products. As a courtesy to some of them, I'm hardcore. I'm like, you send me this thing, I'm going to test it and publish it. I'm not here just to do you a favor. Occasionally, if I have a good relationship with a company and I find something, I'm like, hey, I tested this. This doesn't make sense to me. Does it make sense to you? And they go back and say, well, we don't know. Can we have time to figure out what's going on? I'm like, yeah, go ahead. And you send me the gear. I can't force your hand in going and publishing the result against you, give me the okay. But know that if you hadn't sent me the gear, this would have already been published. It's also a carrot to get companies to volunteer to work with me on this thing. Some people say, well, so you don't do negative reviews of these things. I'm like, true that, but it's 1 in 1,000 products that gets sent to me that I don't do, because 99% of the stuff people send me, they know it's going to measure well anyway. So the stuff gets published. But once or twice I've gotten some, and the company's been just a joy to work with. Engineers they're going to go back and redesign, fix this stuff. I'm like, what's the deal with me going out there, posting this right now? Now, if you saw me in the hallway and say, hey, do you know anything about this? I'm like, I've had, it's got issues. But it's very rare, but it's happened. So I don't want to tell you, no, I've never done that, but it's happened.
Absolutely, and I appreciate the openness. Yes. So I have to bring up the big question, because it's just that type of product, cables.
Yeah.
What do you believe a cable should be?
Scott, well, my application is a little different, but in general, cables got to be reliable, obviously. It's got to, sometimes they're not. They're a pain in the neck to put in. I like them to be flexible because I keep pulling them, unplugging them, and I like the feel of a flexible cable. Those tend to have more strands in them, and I like the jacket to be silicone if it can be, and just some niceties. Turns out you can buy these Amazon Basic RCA cables, come with gorgeous rubber or whatever they're made out of. I'm very flexible and very robust, and cost $9. I bought their USB cable, and it was terrible to use. So, who knows where to go get it? Not from performance point of view, but from that. I tested, by the way, as much as I said these things it makes no difference as far as performance, I have tested them. Remember I said 10% of me, I'm down 10% from that. I don't just assume these are the same. So I've tested USB cable. Okay. Turned out the best performing, you could measure the difference. And the best one was the shortest one. Wasn't the most expensive one. The shortest one, and that makes sense that the shortest one would be. But I actually measured them. I put them on a DAC that was very sensitive to USB. And there I could measure difference. Not audible difference, but I could measure electrical difference. I have measured DACs that have 122 dB SINAD with that $9 Amazon cable. So if the $9 Amazon cable is able to measure the entire system that well, right, then obviously it's not a performance issue at all. I've never, I have some transparent audio cables that have a big network in them. It does some filtering, but it's in ultrasonics. I've measured that, but I can't make it audibly do anything weird. I have some fancy speaker cables from Australia that just came. It was a big thread about him. He ran some tests and experiments that showed that there is audible difference. So I'll be testing these speaker cables soon. I've tested Ethernet cables for difference. I've tested different power sources, battery sources for DACs, a lot of things you think, why even bother testing, you know, but I'm like, it's better to point to data. You know, you can say they're all the same, but it's much better when you say, and here's the measurements. And by the way, we were honest. When we found a measurable difference, we also told that. We didn't hide that in our back pocket. We fessed up that, hey, there's measurable difference. But look, it's on the cheapest, crappiest DAC. When I've used the best DAC, or even $99 DAC, there was no measurable difference.
And can you explain why that is? Can you explain why a great measuring $99 DAC will not show a difference in USB cables?
Sure. So what's the power source of that DAC? Usually it's a USB. Data and power comes to it. Anybody who designs anything connected to USB would know this bus from a computer is going to be dirty as all get out. I mean, this is a computer bus. Every time any electrons moving inside that computer generating ground bounce and so forth, it's just going to be noisy. So what's the first thing you do? You re-regulate that. By the way, you got to step it down anyway. This is a 5-volt signal. Chances are your ICs are running a lower voltage or higher voltage. So you're converting it to another voltage, and then you use capacitors and chokes and inductors, and you filter all that stuff. And once you filter all that out of audible band, you know, what happens to 2 megahertz doesn't matter. But turns out those are easy to filter too. But you basically filter all that and get the cleanest DC signal there is. And then I confirm the performance of that product using a $2 USB cable. And the answer is then it's been done. What would the USB cable do to lower that noise? I've opened some of these what I call USB decrappifiers and one little capacitor on it. Well, one little inductor is like, well, no, those are also inside the DAC. And they're purpose-built inside the DAC because they're in the power supply section designed to isolate. Now, there are legitimate problems you can run into. One is called ground loop. The USB brings in a ground from a PC. You hook it up to your DAC. Then you go from RCA output of that to an amplifier that's plugged into a different outlet in your home. And the differential in the voltage causes currents to flow. And that can be buzz, hum, hisses. You can hear your computer actually doing things. When that happens, if you change cables, you change the impedance of that ground. And that may make some difference. Randomly, you know, it may make things better or worse. It's not a solution you go chase. So there is something to be said about, you know, something is electrically changing. That's why I'm able to measure it. But as far as the fidelity of the signal, noise can protrude and can come out of the RCA jack. So bits are bits doesn't help you there, by the way. We objectivists tend to use that argument. It's a wrong argument, because noise travels from one electrically to the other. The digital data, though, is reliable. You know, on a 3-foot cable or even 10-foot cable, you're not going to lose data. And so the samples are 100% accurate, and the DAC is taking those and converting them to analog. So the probability of fidelity changes is extremely low. So you can hear hiss or buzz and things like that, but you're not going to hear a veil, not going to be more too digital sounding. All that stuff is the imagination at work and not, you know, realities of what the USB cable can do.
So a high quality product, well-designed product still is supreme rather than chasing cables.
Yeah, and people often tell me, why don't you test it with a crappy product to see if this cable made a difference? I'm like, really? You're going to spend $300 on a cable to fix a crappy DAC? Take the $300, spend it on a DAC. And by the way, use balanced output. Use balanced output, and that solves a ground problem too. And then it really won't make a difference. But yeah, there is no reason to get a crappy device to begin with. Get a proper device that's been measured, that you know is good, and it's going to sharply reduce the need for any of these things. And they don't fix anything anyways. You know, people think in lay intuition, if I get a cable that says it's going to filter things, must be better. In reality, that manufacturer didn't even measure to see if it does filter. I've tested some of these products to actually make things worse. In fact, these things are all batteries that generate, USB power for you. I measured them. They have switching noise on them. They actually add noise to your DAC. They made lay intuition that a battery is better, right? Well, the battery still had to have its voltage switched on and off and charged and what have you, and that switching noise or ground loop currents come through. So, but yeah, I mean, it's anything that's good. I don't care, obviously, and I'm very picky about things, and I just use generic cables.
Okay, and you use generic cables on your high fidelity system, your personal?
I do. I have a set of fancy cables on my speaker just because somebody gave it to us. But it's just there. But no, I wouldn't hesitate to use 12 gauge wire. By the way, gauge of the wire makes a difference depending on length of it. If it's long enough, and depending on impedance graph of your speaker, you can change its tonality. So, but once you get to 12 gauge in a typical 2-channel home system where you're just laying wires on the ground, there's no scenario that sound will change. But if you use 16, 18 gauge, 20 gauge, or run 50-footer cable behind walls, you can change the frequency response of speakers, literally because of the resistance that that cable has, the impedance that it has. So use thicker cables.
So is it a good idea to run, say, 10 gauge? That's a very low impedance and resistance cable?
Below 12, it's negligible, but doesn't harm anything. So I find that the heavier cables are harder to mess with, right? They can break connectors and yank on stuff. And so 12 gauge to me is a sweet spot, but you want to go 11 gauge, 10 gauge, fine. That's okay. 14 is also okay if you're short, but I said, why chance it? Stay at 12 gauge. And then you're golden. And 12 gauge wire is not expensive. By the way, there's a lot of crap wire out there. I measured a whole bunch of 12 gauge wires, and there's some I bought from Best Buy and 2 or 3 other places at Fry's. They had huge resistance. So I assumed inside of them are aluminum or something, and they have 3 to 4 times the resistance of a normal cable. I was shocked. So buy, a good cable, Belden or something that's just name brand, Blue Jeans or somebody that's sells you the proper cable.
Right. Where is audiosciencereview.com going in the future?
I expect it to keep growing at the rate it is. We're right now one of the largest sites as far as audio is concerned. We are just behind HeadFi and DIY Audio, I think. We've passed Stereophile. We passed almost every other forum out there. But still, I think we're hitting a very small fraction of the world that should care about what we do. So I'd say at least there's 10x expansion beyond where it is. I look at myself and I say, look, I don't know if I have more than 5 or 10 years of this in me to do this. So hopefully I'll be healthy and I can do this for 30 years. But I'm hoping that we solve the problem in that we transform the industry to believe in verifying designs, providing measurements to people, or at some point the machinery is working it by itself. But if not, we got to keep this going. And the community has been great and supported me and continue to invest to do this.
Would you be happy if every manufacturer bought an AP analyzer and an NFS and literally you could stop doing it?
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to go back to, there's a lot of good discussion, like I said, about research and in science and engineering of this stuff. I don't need to measure stuff. There are days I sit here and I said, this is DAC number 355. I'm plugging it in because the company didn't plug it in, or the company did, and people don't trust their information yet, so they want me to do it. But yeah, at some point, this is just, I shouldn't have to do this. On this thing.
Have you measured?
I got to bring it up. I'd say probably. When you said DAC, most of them are standalone, but some of them are DACs inside other product. I'd say it's probably 350 to 400 DACs I've measured in 2 years.
And how many pairs of speakers? Or how many speakers, I should say?
Speakers last year, I measured 117 or 118 last year alone. And recently started measuring headphones. I've done 25 of those since I bought my gear.
And how much gear do you have in queue to be measured?
At any time, I have 4 to 6 weeks worth of stuff. And that's assume one a day. And I have at least that much. And then I have other projects which I never get to do and which don't involve gear that I like to do. RumiQ, for example, I've done a few of those. Common requests are, where should you have volume control, for example? I'd love to do a test of different volume controls in the path. And so once in a while, I'll do those. I do teardowns. Also, I open the tops of some of the equipment that I can tear down and go over their design from safety point of view, reliability point of view, or how they work, what's in them on this thing. So right now, I try to maintain one a day cadence on this thing. And it's acceptable. With COVID, actually forced me to do more of them, because usually we take summer off, but this year we didn't, and last year we didn't. So I just kept testing.
Do you still enjoy it?
I do. Let me tell you the part that I enjoy. It's like a reality show where I run these tests and there's anticipation of what's the first snapshot result going to say? In the case of DAX and others, there's this dashboard. And that thing pops up, and one of the things is great or not great. And I don't know that going in. I just assume maybe there should be. And there's that moment of euphoria and aha, that is fun. The other one is discovering stuff. It's like, all this time I thought, these speakers were like this, or this thing was like that, but it's completely different. Aha, that's what it's doing. That's why they built the product this way and that way. Or, oh my gosh, all this time they've been saying how great this thing is. It really is not great, on this thing. So there is that moment of discovery that is very, very rewarding. And I know I can't have that high any other way. Nobody else is doing that for me. I can't go have this journey of discovery all the time, every day, plug it in. There's drudgery after that. Once I've had that first screen, I'd love to just stop there and post that one result. But people expect me to post every other one. Then I'm like, okay, now test number 2, test number 3, test number 4, test number 5. Get to A, now I got to Photoshop them all, get them prepped, post them online. But yeah, I still enjoy doing it. Or I would stop. I mean, there's just no reason to do it if the enjoyment is not there.
How do you feel about Aaron's Audio Corner getting an NFS now as well?
I have mixed feelings. On one hand, it's fantastic that he's getting into it, because my throughput is throttled by also doing many other categories of products. I can't just keep doing speakers. And there's so many speakers out there. Oh my gosh, like DAX and speakers are similar, and there's so much. Anybody can become a speaker company tomorrow, right? You go either build the thing yourself or get a cabinet shop to build it, crossover, blah, 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 some simulation, and you got a speaker. So there's so much to be had. The part that bothers me a little bit, and this has happened in a couple of other instances, that I hope I wasn't the motivation for him to go and spend this kind of money. This is crazy money. I don't know what his financial situation is. Maybe it's extremely good. In my case, it hurt a lot to spend this kind of money. But in grand scheme of things, it wasn't like, okay, our kids have gone to college and finished and all that stuff. We're a different part of life cycle and financially. So I think I absorb it a lot better than I think other people who just want to follow. I just want to make sure he doesn't think this is so much fun. And that's why I want to do that. And I'll tell you, it's not fun when you go run a speaker. 2 hours later, you get the result, you find out, oh crap, something was set up wrong. I start over again on this thing. And so it's not unlike electronics where I can run a test and 30 seconds later I've got a result.
Right.
As nice and automated as this thing is, 2.5 hours, and it requires about 45 minutes of setup time to get it going. So he was killing himself, obviously. He was spending 3 days doing the test that I do in 2 hours.
Right.
I have not talked to him about this aspect. Bless his heart for wanting to do this, but I hope none of it came because he said, oh, look at this Amir guy. He must have the best job in the world with this machine. I want to have the best job. I know the guy bought an AP analyzer, and I felt the same way when I heard him do it. And I saw him do a bunch of tests trying to keep up with me. And he tried to copy my style, my graphs the same way, which caused some confusion. And then I saw him drop right off way down, in activity. And I felt guilty there that these guys at some level, it's like thinking the life of this actor is so great, but you don't know all the work they got to do to go, act on this thing. So I don't know. He's a great guy. He's more vertically integrated in speaker analysis because he's done drivers and he's tested things. And he also spends tremendous amount of time and energy on each review. So he goes way deeper than I do. I'm a 95% guy, as I said. I want to get the message out. Good, not good, great. I'm done. I'm not here to be the QC for the company and test everything to make sure every screw's tightened and what have you. I'm just going to get in, get out. You have a million times more information than you did before. But he's an A to Z kind of guy on this thing. So, I think he needed it because he was going to kill himself doing what he was doing. Absolutely. Manually rotating a giant speaker in his backyard. Right. It's insanity written over it.
You're not opposed to him having one.
Oh, no.
Working alongside doing a very similar process.
No. I mean, like I said, we're very different in how we approach it anyway. So I don't look at what he's doing, what I'm doing as, he's just has a completely different take on it. It's like two different actors playing very different. There's room for both of them. But at the end, our mission's both the same. We both verifying whether the speaker is good or not good. We both comply to the same standards. Same spinorama. So from that point of view, we generate comparable data. Somebody can look at his measurements compared to my measurements from another speaker and decide between them. So from that point of view, not at all. No, I think it's fantastic. Like I said, I just have some guilt that I hope is not true, that wasn't the reason he went and got it, that he, on his own motivation, he decided to spend that kind of money is good.
And I would like to see a common speaker measured at your facility and at his to show viewers and readers that your both systems are within the tolerance range from one to another. I think that would be an important test to run. So you both run a speaker, a small bookshelf, just to show that the results from both machines indeed do match within the tolerance of the machine.
Yeah, he's got an ELAC speaker, as I mentioned, that I measured with mine, and then he measured it with his manual system.
Right.
So, and he owns that speaker, so he can go back, and I suspect that he'll probably do that because he has his manual measurements and he's going to want to compare it to that. Beyond that, it goes back to what the earlier discussion we had. It's that 5%. I trust that it'll generate results that are good enough, and if they're not, it'll come out and stink real quick. You know what I'm saying? He will run into a brick wall if he's testing speakers right now that there are proper measurements for him. He's got JBLs he's going to test. He's got Dutch, and these all have anechoic measurements, so you can do it. People have made that request. Is it high on my list of priorities to stop measuring a new speaker for somebody and go and doing this? It's not. If it's high on his priorities and he asks me, I'll do it. But like I said, we have good enough, one sample at least, that he can go do that. There are measurements and there are optimizations of parameters we tweak in these systems, and that can impact certain class of speakers and not others. And he needs to develop his own workflow. His system also shorter than mine. He didn't get the extension, and that may impact how you measure even bookshelf speakers slightly. But the general trends should be very, very correlated.
And being that it's measured to a standard should certainly take any inconsistency out of it as well.
Right.
You've been more than gracious with your time. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that I should have?
No, you've asked a lot of good questions. I guess the one thing I want to make sure people know, I look at other forums, what people say behind me, and there's all this allegations of, he's in cahoots with these companies, or he loves the Chinese company, he hates the American company, he's never said anything good. He's trying to help this out. So I just want to make sure that it's absolutely clear. I have no relationship with any of these companies, none whatsoever. I don't know most of these companies. They send me stuff once in a while. I measure them. I'm a fan of great performance. You could be a no-name company, do great performance, you get a thumbs up from me, and you could be the biggest company in the world that I have great relationship with, as in Harman, and you produce crappy products like their RCAM AVRs, and you get a thumbs down from me. And it damaged my relationship with them, so be it. So I want to make sure whoever watches this video know that this is, there are no angels anywhere. I have my pride in what I do, and you come after me, say your stuff sucks, so I'm going to defend it. So, we all have our, soft spots there. But as far as, financial motivation. My ethics mean everything. My principles mean everything to me. I'm over, doing some reviews and stuff. I'm not going to compromise that. So from that point of view, this is a great service. It's worked out for everybody that I enjoy doing it, spend the money doing this stuff for as long as I can. We're going to test stuff for people benefit on this thing. Don't read bad intentions into this stuff. There is none. I get a box, I open it up, test the stuff, publish it on the website. I do it without emotion, by the way. I don't hold grudges. I don't, like we talked about shit, build bad stuff, doing build good stuff. Long time ago, I learned if you're online, you got to put aside your emotions on the side and park it and, control, that desire to just judge things based on emotions. You got to be neutral. So that's really the main message for me is, be straight about it, be transparent, and, be an advocate for consumers, not manufacturers. As much as I like manufacturers, I'm here as a service to people, buy this stuff.
It's a great message. And thank you so much for investing at least $200,000 of your personal money into equipment. And thank you to your wife as well.
Yep.
And most importantly, thank you for all your time, because I think people lose sight of actually it's beyond the money, right? For the equipment.
Definitely.
It's the time that it takes to test the equipment, then go to a forum and post all of it, and then answer hundreds of questions. It's just an incredible amount of time that I think is underappreciated and underlooked a lot of the time. So thank you again from myself and hopefully from all the other viewers.
Great.
And please go to audiosciencereview.com. Please watch, like, and subscribe on all the videos, but specifically this one. And if you need to get in touch with Amir, by all means, he's always available. audiosciencereview.com.
Definitely. Thanks a lot for having me, Jason.
Thank you so much, Amir.
Thanks for listening. Find us on YouTube and Facebook at The Intellectual People Podcast and online at theintellectualpeoplepodcast.com. Check back for exciting new episodes.